Chefs Without Restaurants, episode 155 with Josh Sharkey.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, product and service are really everything, right? So, and that's was probably what helped a lot of those restaurants become successful, is that product is obviously always top of mind. And so is service. And, I'm a chef, so it's tough to say this, but, at the end of the day, like really incredible service can actually, help to offset not so great of a product, or maybe a product that isn't like the best, of its class. And when you have both, obviously that's when things really, really shine. I think that the most important thing, and it happens more now, but in general, what is like vital is to just know what your customers want. I think that there's a tendency to sort of like cook based on what you think is right, and you want to do that, but at the same time, you're cooking for people that are going to come eat your food, and you have to be mindful of that and empathetic to it. And that's typically what I see as like a common thread of success, is when you're listening to what your customers want, what they don't want, how they want it, and it makes you better as a chef as well.
This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On the show, I have conversations with culinary entrepreneurs and people in the food and beverage industry who took a different route. They're caterers, research chefs, personal chefs, cookbook authors, food truckers, farmers, cottage bakers, and all sorts of culinary renegades. I myself fall into the personal chef category, as I started my own personal chef business, Perfect Little Bites, 11 years ago. And while I started working in kitchens in the early 90s, I've literally never worked in a restaurant. Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. On today's podcast, I have Josh Sharkey. He's the founder of Meez, a website that helps chefs organize their recipes. When I have guests like this on the show, I don't want it to be like an infomercial. I only try and bring on guests who actually have products that I use and enjoy and think are really beneficial. One of the cornerstones of this podcast and organization is to really highlight things that I think are going to help you build and grow your businesses. So what I love about Meez is it's an online tool that you can put your recipes into. It makes it super easy to scale them, cost them, and even share them. It's nice because you can give access to your team so that they can look at them. If you're a personal chef, you can also share them with customers so that they can look at them but not edit them. And unlike a lot of these kind of programs, you can actually use Meez for free. And yes, there are paid plans that have some great functions, but if you're looking for a place to just put your recipes in and have them so they're easily accessible wherever you are, if you've got a computer and the internet, Meez is a great tool for that. And because this is a business podcast, we also talk about business. Josh is a chef. He went to culinary school, so he has a background. He has worked in some of the best restaurants in the country. So a lot of that informed Meez. He's not one of these tech guys who hasn't worked in the industry. He has so much restaurant experience. So we also touch on things like the customer experience, launching and growing his business, some of his favorite tools and resources, and what he wished he knew before starting his business. I hope you enjoy this episode. Go check out Meez. The website is getmeez.com. That's GETMEEZ.com. And of course, all the links will be in the show notes. And this is the part where I talk about sponsors. If you go to chefswithoutrestaurants.com/sponsors, you're going to find all the info on our current sponsors, previous sponsors, and affiliate partners. With the affiliate partners, all that means is those are products I already use and love. If you click on the links on that page, it costs you literally nothing, but I'm going to get a small commission when you buy stuff. And I'm most thankful for our podcast audio ad sponsors. So before this week's episode starts, you're going to hear from this week's sponsor, the United States Personal Chef Association. So thanks so much for listening, and have a great week. Over the past 30 years, the world of the personal chef has grown in importance to fulfill those dining needs. While the pandemic certainly upended the restaurant experience, it allowed personal chefs to close that dining gap. Central to all of that is the United States Personal Chef Association. Representing nearly 1,000 chefs around the U.S. and Canada, USPCA provides a strategic backbone to those chefs that includes liability insurance, training, communications, certification, and more. It's a reassurance to consumers that the chef coming into their home is prepared to offer them an experience with their meal. USPCA provides training to become a personal chef through our preparatory membership. Looking to showcase your products or services to our chefs and their clients? Partnership opportunities are available. Call Angela today at 1-800-995-2138, extension 705, or email her at aprather@uspca.com for membership and partner info. Hey, Josh, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hello there, Chris.
It's really cool to have you on the show. I think it was so funny that we actually randomly met in person a couple of weeks ago. I had already been in contact with you about coming on the show, and then to just bump over a cup of coffee and some breakfast at Indie Chef Week, I thought was really cool. Well, let's just jump right into it, right? So I usually start with culinary backstory. I want to hear a little bit about you growing up as far as it relates to food and cooking. How did you get into food and cooking? You know, is it something you always wanted to do? Did you have dreams of being a chef, opening a restaurant, or did you just kind of find your way into it?
Well, originally I just found my way into it because my father passed away when I was 16. And so I just started cooking for the family because my mom would work late nights and, it's just sort of a necessity. And then it turned into like an interest where I would start cooking on the weekends for fun with my friends. And I originally thought I would go to college for wrestling. I had a couple scholarships for that. And then it turns out that Johnson & Wales had a really good wrestling program. And I entered this contest and won a scholarship to Johnson & Wales. So ended up going there. And it wasn't actually even at Johnson & Wales, I think, where it really clicked like, oh, this is what I want to do. I eventually entered a different contest that I ended up winning. They flew me to New York for the finals, and there's some incredible chefs that were the judges: Eric Ripert, Marcus Samuelsson, Rick Moonen, and Rocco DeSpirito, and I ended up winning that. So they flew me to Norway. I got to travel the country of Norway as a very young. I was like 19 with these chefs, and ended up cooking at some incredible restaurants there. And that's where I was like, oh, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is awesome. Just being in these Michelin star restaurants and seeing the difference between cooking there and somewhere else. And just, it was just incredible and so inspiring. And that's what really sort of like clicked for me, that turned me into a cook moving forward.
Time frame, where was that? Were you in culinary school? Like, was it when you were going to culinary school when you also did this contest? Did it kind of line up that way?
It was like the end of culinary school. Like I did an associate's degree. So it was a short stint of culinary school, but literally right at the end. And so I think it was the year 2000, like the middle of 2000 is when I ended up going to Norway. And I moved to New York literally right after that.
So what jobs did you do when you got to New York? Were you going for the high-end restaurants?
Yeah, so that's really all I've done up until I started my own businesses. So right when I got to New York, I started working for Chef Rick Moonen at a restaurant called Oceana. From there, I went and worked at John George for a little bit, and then I went to Italy for a while. Came back, started working for Chef Floyd Cardoz and Danny Meyer at Tapla. And then I went to this restaurant called Boulet and cooked there for a while. And then I went to work for Greg Kuntz at Cafe Grey quite a while. So that was the span of about 10 or 12 years. And then I opened my own restaurants after that.
All amazing chefs and restaurants. Did you see any kind of commonalities? I'm always interested in how, especially high-end restaurants operate. What are some of the common threads with those chefs and how those places operate? Because they're at a whole different level. Did you see things that they all kind of had in common, whether it be like how they manage their staff, the creative process, anything that kind of stood out to you that you maybe even then took when you went to open your own businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, product and service are really everything, right? So, and was probably what helped a lot of those restaurants become successful, is that product is obviously always top of mind. And so is service. And, I'm a chef, so it's tough to say this, but, at the end of the day, like really incredible service can actually, help to offset not so great of a product, or maybe a product that isn't like the best, of its class. And when you have both, obviously that's when things really, really shine. I think that the most important thing, and it happens more now, but in general, what is like vital is to just know what your customers want. I think that there's a tendency to sort of like cook based on what you think is right, and you want to do that, but at the same time, you're cooking for people that are going to come eat your food, and you have to be mindful of that and empathetic to it. And that's typically what I see as like a common thread of success is when you're listening to what your customers want, what they don't want, how they want it, and it makes you better as a chef as well.
But there is a fine line there because sometimes the customer doesn't know what they want. Like in terms of cuisine, right? Like if I ask my customers, like, what do you like? What don't you like? And your customers might come and say, I love chicken Parmesan. I like lasagna. I like chicken Alfredo. It's like, well, like that's not what I want to cook, right? So how do I take that and distill that out into something that they're going to enjoy, but something that they couldn't make? Like I'm, as a personal chef, I'm not looking to just recreate whatever your favorite dishes at the Olive Garden are. So how do I then say, okay, well, I hear that you like that, but then also I think you're going to love this thing. And it's something they've never even heard of. It's the same with businesses. You talk about startups and, a lot of times a business wants to, Facebook. Nobody asked for Facebook, right? Like if you ask people like what they wanted, they're not going to tell you that. All these super innovative companies came up with their own thing. So I guess it's kind of distilling out what you hear people say they want, what you see a need for, and then kind of finding a common ground, if that makes sense.
It's funny because it's very similar to starting a startup like that. Is you have to know what questions to ask, and you have to know what answers not to sort of hold as much weight to, because you're not looking for is the solution. You're not looking for them to tell you, I want this type of cuisine that does this. In the startup world, it's what are the problems that you have, and that you don't need to tell me the solution. I'm going to come up with that. That's my job. You just need to tell me what are your pains. And as a customer in the food world, same thing. Like, what do you want? Like, well, I always find that like I never know when something is spicy or not, or I never know if something is going to be too rich, and you can take that and sort of run with it. Like, you don't want to let the customer be too prescriptive, but you do want to understand what is the pain point. Like the classic sort of cliche thing is like Henry Ford saying, if I asked everybody what they wanted at this time in history, they would have said faster horses. And it's the same thing, right? So you need to be careful about what type of information you're pulling, because you want to solve problems, not just, take, word for word what customers are saying, because you're right. Sometimes they don't know what they want, and sometimes they might think they do. And then once you sort of give them what inference you've taken from their concerns, it'll usually sort of work out in the end anyways.
So before you started Meez, there was a period where you're working as a cook, chef in restaurants. You opened your own places. What was the reasoning behind that? Like, did you always want to open a place? And what were these places that you were then opening on your own?
Yeah, I've always wanted to own a business. And I think I never thought that I would start a fast casual restaurant. I came from the fine dining world and the upper echelon of fine dining. And so I always thought that I would be opening a fine dining restaurant. Right around 2008 was when I decided, okay, I'm going to start my restaurant. And, I was considering a fine dining restaurant, but for anybody that was around then, 2008 was a financial crash. And, not a great time to be doing really, really high-end food and high-cost food. And so we had this other concept that we've been thinking about, my business partner and I, and he has a bunch of restaurants in San Francisco now. And the idea was just to sort of fill this void of really good food that's approachable, using the same techniques that we know from the fine dining world and the same products from like farmers and things, but doing it in a type of sort of cuisine that you wouldn't be used to seeing it, like fast casual. In this case, it was like American fast casual, like hot dogs and sandwiches and burgers and things. At the time, that was very novel. That didn't exist. Now it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous, but at the time it was very novel. And so we just sort of decided that was the better route to go for a business.
And then at some point you decided you were going to start Meez. So let's talk about that, because that's really why I want to have you on the show. I want to hear about this company you started, kind of the background in it. So what is Meez and how did you get there from, where you were?
Well, Meez is really the culmination of all the things that I sort of would sort of slowly developed these frustrations over the course of the last 20 years of being a cook and then being a chef and running kitchens and then starting a business and running a business and building a team and training a team and then running a very large restaurant group and having multi-unit brands and all these sort of like pain points that just kept developing. And the impetus originally honestly was like I lost a notebook in like 2002 and I was working for Chef Floyd at Tabla and I And I was working for free for Mario Batali making salumi in the mornings. And I had this notebook of all the recipes and humidity and temperatures and times and ideas and all kinds, everything you could think of. And I lost that notebook. And so the novel idea originally was like, I want to digitize all my recipes. And then over the course of 15 more years, there's all these other things that were like, oh, we need this, we need this, we need this. And finally, after about 8 years of running my restaurants, I realized like, okay, I'm going to have a much bigger impact on the industry if I can give this back as opposed to just, my restaurants. And so I divested from the restaurants and started working on Meez. And Meez is essentially our digital tool, the digital tool for food professionals. I think, the frustration I've had at a very high level, like a 30,000 foot level, is that as food professionals, the only technology we have in the kitchen is inventory software. And like, what the heck? Like, that recipes are way more than just like a list of ingredients for a cost. Those are important and you need that. And it needs to be way easier than it is in an inventory system. But there's so much more that we do, in terms of like training and collaboration and R&D and, scaling batches, like the way that we actually need to scale them and converting units and distributing your recipes and sharing them and all the things that we do, that we need allergens and, we need to understand the cost of our recipes, and that needs to be really easy. So Meez is essentially the culinary operating system for any food professional. Doesn't matter if you're running a multi-unit restaurant group or if you're a private chef or you're a culinary student or you have a catering company. Meez is intended to be where all your recipes live. And then there's lots of really cool stuff that you can do with your recipes once they're in there. And we make it really easy to get the recipes into Meez, which is really important as well.
I feel the pain of losing a notebook. Even though I digitized, early on I was putting my recipes in like Word documents. I used to keep them on a lanyard on a jump drive. And one time I left that in a computer somewhere and it was taken and never returned. And you're just like, even though I thought that would be a lot safer and a lot easier, I kept it like around my neck, like it was the submarine nuclear launch keys or something. And just one time I left it in the jump drive in a computer and someone yanked it. And that was it. I've used some of the software. I used to work at Sodexo. So, they have a lot of operating systems that maybe many restaurants don't. So I'm very familiar with using like these things where you've got the recipes and the scaling. I find the scaling to always be clunky. Like we've made crab cakes for 4 people and then you scale it up to be 100. And now that 2 teaspoons of Old Bay is like 4 cups of Old Bay and it just like gets blown out. Is there a way that your scaling system kind of looks at something like that, where it's not just like we take this and times everything times 100?
Yeah. So there's custom batch sizes and things like that. And by the way, like, first of all, all of those systems, and I know the ones you're talking about in Sodexo, it'd be great if they actually converted from teaspoons to cups. They don't, because that's really difficult. We do that in Meez, because I at the same time always get annoyed if I have a recipe that's like, half a cup of baking soda or something for a really big batch, and then I want to make a small batch and it's like 0.025 cups. I'm like, I can't measure that. And so I want to convert that to grams or to teaspoons. And so in Meez, like I spent a lot of time, thinking through all the things that were really hard about getting recipes into any of these platforms and then using the recipes in the platforms. And so that's the majority of what we focus on, is how can we make it really easy to scale and to convert. If I'm running low on an ingredient, and let's just say I'm making a pepper relish and it's supposed to be, 10,000 grams and I have 9,482 grams after I dice everything, obviously, because I won't have exactly like that. The recipe will scale for me, so it's precise. And if I want to make 2 quarts instead of 4 pounds, I can do that. And we do that because we have this database of thousands and thousands of ingredients that we're continually updating. We have chefs and registered dietitians that are updating these things all the time with all the empirical information that you would typically need to like do yourself, right? So like the yields and the conversion. So if you dice an onion or chop an onion or slice an onion or peel an onion or juice an onion, and how much does that onion weigh and what does that convert to if you dice a cup of it, and how much does that, in volume and weight, and what are the allergens associated, and what are the other ways in which you spell that word and the ways that you misspell that word, and all that is built in and constantly updated so that it's really easy to get your information in and have it be way more dynamic than it was in like your Word doc. And B, that you can do all those things when you need to get cost, for example, and you're using a pound of avocado in a recipe. But of course you buy avocados by the piece, like a 24 count, box or something. Well, it's already converts for you. It's already built in. We know that a Hoscado on average has 4.35 ounces of flesh in it. You can customize that if you want, but it's built in. So we try to think about what are all the things that we as chefs do in these systems that aren't cooking, and we just do all that for you so that you can focus on what do I want to make, how do I want to make it, do I want to update it? If I update it, will everybody know right away? And can it be easy to update and easy to change and share? And that's really where we should be spending our time as chefs, not figuring out the conversion between this and that, and adding in all these sort of sub recipes that you don't even use because you need to know how much a peeled carrot, yields and things like that.
And how easy is it to get recipes in? So let's say, again, going back to a Word doc, because that's how I have a lot of things, can you just kind of copy and paste and drop in, and there's some way that it, has some smart tech that converts that out?
We essentially devised, over the course of several years, I just got recipes from everyone I knew and everyone I didn't know and everyone they knew, and looked at thousands and thousands of formats of recipes because we all do it differently. And we developed a lexicon of recipe data, meaning ingredients and quantities and units of measure and stations and tools and headers and notes and prep methods and all those things that are associated. And we can parse all of that out. And so when you import a recipe, even if you put salt to taste and half G of, diced onion and 3 PT of however you write it, if you put headers or notes, whatever, we can ascertain that. And so we are always tracking kind of the delta between what you enter and the final output so that we can keep getting smarter too. So when you take that random Word document you have and put it into Meez, it standardizes it and it still makes it look beautiful and structured, but it has all that sort of information that you need. So you can scale it and convert it and, add your images and videos and really, really easily. When we were building Meez, I was building it within the ecosystem of this really large restaurant group that I was running. And, we had to put our recipes into a inventory system as well. It took us about 9 months to get all of our recipes into that inventory system, literally. And we had, a full-time person working on it. It was 7 different concepts and thousands of recipes. It took us literally 2 days to get them into Meez. And now we have, integrations built where you can actually push your recipe data to those systems. So the amount of time that you save is, immense. And as you know, in 9 months, those recipes are not the same anyways. We've changed them. So imagine having to update that. That's a big part of what we're trying to solve as well. Just make it really, really easy to get all this information in so you can do what's really important, which is use these recipes.
Can you quick convert from say grams to teaspoons?
Yeah. And you can do it dynamically by every ingredient because obviously a teaspoon of baking soda weighs a different amount than a teaspoon of shiokoji, which is different from a teaspoon of dark rye flour. All of those conversions are built in.
One of the big things I do, I blog, right? And I weigh everything in grams, but one of the complaints I get is, the average home user isn't weighing things yet, even though they should be. But it's I want to be precise on, this is a 7.5 grams of whatever. And then I post on my blog and people are like, well, how many teaspoons is that? It's well, shit, I didn't figure that out. You should be weighing this. But
yeah,
sometimes people still want to see that kind of measurement. So I just was looking for something also that would be really easy to do it that way.
Yeah, 100%. And you can do it really, really easily. You literally, wherever you see a unit in a recipe, just click on it, put whatever other unit you want, and it updates for you. And that's not just grams to teaspoons. Let's just say I'm using 1 jalapeno, right? But let's just say I'm using 25 grams of jalapeno. Well, the average jalapeno is, 28 grams. That some are larger, some are smaller. But if someone does want to know how many jalapenos it is, then, they can use one. And if you have a recipe where you do just want to say 1 jalapeno for my salsa verde, you can get a cost, per pound of that. So that's all just built in. I also use Meez at home, and my wife uses it. And so when she's making a recipe for one of my pancake recipes, let's say, I have it all in grams, of course, but she's not going to weigh anything in grams. So she just has it all in volume for her.
Where's the hard sell? I mean, when you try and pitch this to, restaurants or chefs, even if you're just recreationally talking to friends, do you have people say I'm not interested, I'm not into, writing recipes, whatever? What are some of the things you hear as to maybe why people haven't wanted to adapt the system?
Most chefs, I haven't really come across chefs, and my team does most of the time now, but the majority of chefs see it and they're holy shit, where has this been my whole life? This is, because look, it's what I wanted. I'm just building the thing that I've wanted my whole life. And, I'm a chef. And so my hope is that like everybody, like we're all in this together. Like we just build what everybody keeps asking for. The pushback we do get is there is obviously like a segment of chefs. It's funny, in sort of like the fine dining world, this like never is the case. But there are a segment of chefs that are like, my recipes are very like precious and I don't want anybody to see them and I don't want to like digitize them. And for them, that's, that we honestly, we don't really try to sort of like force that from them, and they have to, like get over or not. We have some of the best chefs in the world, and most of them are like, try to execute what we do, So that's one. And I think there's also like a segment of a very small segment. And I think it's a dying breed of them that say, oh, we don't use recipes. Anybody that says they don't use recipes, it's a novel thing to say, because you do, first of all. If you have a team and you don't use recipes, good luck surviving. To your question of like how you don't survive as a business, don't have recipes. And, that's a really great way of not surviving, because, customers need consistency. And if you just think that everybody will just make it the same way because of some way you've told them to make it, well, that's just not going to happen. And it's just not a very good way to run a business. And then it also sets people up for failure, because when they don't, it's a very old school way of thinking, because when they don't do it the way that you want, like your first, reaction is to blame them. And it's not their fault at all. It's because you didn't document exactly what you want to have happen. And we make it really easy to do that, even with video and things, so you can be very clear. But when you are like as an individual chef, if you're just cooking like you're a private chef and you go somewhere, a lot of what you're going to do is probably by taste. You're just like, you're not measuring everything as you go. That said, and I'm the same way as a chef a lot of times when I cook, but there's a lot of things where like, I need the base, right? Like if I'm making nok cham, right? I have a base of like that I've over the years of like, this is how much like, lime juice and sugar and jalapeno and shallot that I use, and how much fish sauce. And like, I'll have derivatives of that, and I'll maybe add peach, or I'll add, peanut butter and things like that. But like, I have my base, because like, first of all, it's, all of us, sometimes we just have brain fart. It's like, I forgot the thing. And then there are some things, of course, that like, you just need a recipe for, like bread, and, and there are a lot of sauces where like, the ratios are really important, and you can derive from it, and you should, but you have a base. And I think that's sort of the bedrock of mise en place, right? Is have all of your sort of like, information together in addition to your products, right? So like, yes, you set up your station, but you also set up like, okay, here's like the, the foundation of all of these things that I cook, and I'm going to sort of iterate on them, but I want to know that I have like this base, because also if you do iterate on them, like what worked, what didn't work, right? If you did add more of something or less of something, or you reduced it longer, or you added, mango puree this time instead of passion fruit, or like what happened? Was it good? Was it bad? And that kind of thing is really important as well. So that was a bit of a rant, but
no, but I totally get it. Like I just made a chimichurri this morning, and that starts with me making a red wine vinaigrette first. And I have a ratio of how much oil to how much vinegar I like, and then how many teaspoons of whatever spice. Then the herbs, you can get a little loosey-goose, it's like, one bunch cilantro, one bunch parsley, or two bunches of both. And just, then you kind of adjust by texture, and it might need more salt. But I always start with this very base like vinaigrette, so I get the balance of oil to vinegar to spice right. And then you can just kind of start playing around with the types of herbs and balance it from there. But yes, there's like a very definite starting point that I have with that recipe. So it's a hybrid of, yes, there's some recipe, and then some is kind of by taste and texture.
100%.
What happens if I use Meez and for whatever reason, I don't want to use it anymore? Like it's price, or I don't like it or something. Like my concern is always that I put all this work in this thing that's on someone else's platform, and then I'm not using it anymore. Is there a way to export your stuff out? Just thinking about like Instagram, right? Like you post all your food photos on there. It's the only place you have it. Someone hacks your account. You've lost it. You start from zero. So the same way, like, because that's my concern is I've got all these recipes. I'm going to put all this effort into it. I don't want people to start off on the negative or the bad foot thinking that they would leave. But that is something in the back of my mind is like, okay, I put in all this work to put my recipes here. Now, for whatever reason, I'm not using it. Is there a way to get those recipes off the system, or to keep them, or something? Or, what's to say that like you just go out of business, it's not your thing anymore. Now I've lost all this work I put into it. Because I do think a lot of us are like hoarders with those recipes and that stuff, right? And you want to make sure that if something goes awry, you're still going to have those.
Well, 100%, and you should be, right. You should have those for life. And we thought about all of that before we ever even launched, both from a security standpoint, right, to make sure no one can ever like get your recipes. From an evergreen standpoint of like Meez is free to just have your recipes, right? So if you're using Meez for your business and you're getting your costs or whatever, all those things that you need to do, you have a team, you're sharing whatever those like you can pay for the app to do all those things. But if at any point you're like, you know what, I'm not doing that anymore, there's a free version of Meez, so just have your recipes, and that's because you should have these for life, and you can export. Obviously, like exporting recipes out of Meez, they're not going to be nearly the same, right? Because all the functionality is what you can do in Meez. Outside of that, they're just a static document. And, the value is obviously having them to be able to do all these things to them. But there's lots of ways in which we make sure that you never lose your recipes and that no matter what, you can have them, even if you can't pay any longer. Sometimes you just can't pay. Sometimes people go to business and they still want their recipes. And that's important actually for us, because our vision here is, I want this to be the universal recipe medium. Like when you think of creating and storing your recipes, they should go into Meez. And then there's lots of other stuff you want to do. And if you want to do those things, then you can pay for that. But at any time, you can always just have your recipes, at hand and not have to have that paywall. It's a reason why we partner with a lot of culinary schools and students get Meez as well, because we want you to have this for life. It should be something that you have. I wish 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I started putting my recipes in here, because I've been putting them in from, over the last couple of years, I've been putting in all my recipes from all the restaurants I worked at and all the things that I've done. And there's tons that I'm sure that I don't have in there. And I'm like, man, if I had this from day one, I would have so much stuff, and I would have so much like, insights of like, okay, I want to make something with quince. And I can look back and say, what was that thing I did with quince at Boulé where we used sodium citrate? And I'm like, oh yeah. And then I did that thing, at that Italian restaurant in Piedmont, and they had that reduction, and I can see all those things. It's like, oh yeah, there's that thing. And it's all there for me, and I can pull it up really quickly.
So is there a search function by like ingredient or something? Like if I'm just looking for something that uses, key limes or whatever, can you search and it'll like go through?
Oh yeah. So we have like search on steroids. It's like search and filter. Like basically you can search by any name or any ingredient, but you don't have to like create tags or anything like that. Basically, as soon as you create a recipe, you can search by name, ingredient. You can search by the station it exists on, any tools that you use in it, any words that exist in the prep steps or in the headers or notes, who you've shared it with, or what allergens are associated with it, or when it was created. All that stuff is searchable and filterable. So in Meez, you can say, okay, I want to see everything that has quince and blueberries that was made by Chris that doesn't have a dairy allergy from Boulé or something, and all of that so you can parse it and kind of get exactly what you're looking for.
And there's ways to share recipes with third parties, like other chefs. Like let's say I have 1,000 recipes in the system, but I'm doing a pop-up dinner with you. So I want you to see these 5 recipes only. Is there a way to get you just like those 5 recipes?
There's 3 ways to share recipes in Meez. So this sort of like friend-to-friend way is I just can share a copy with you, right? And that's basically like, and you don't need to pay. Basically, like you'll get an email that says, "Hey, Josh just shared this recipe for tarte tatin with you, and you now have a free version of Meez, and you have that recipe, and you have all the stuff associated with it." And that's one way. So to share a copy. The other way is to share access. So like I can share just like you would in Google, let's say, where I can share a view access to you or edit access to you. And then that way you can see, if it's a viewer access, you can't edit it, but you can still scale it. You can see all the videos and pictures, and you can print it, that kind of stuff, but you can't edit the recipe. Or I can share edit access that you can actually edit the recipe. And then the last way is I can publish recipes. So like you'll see this on Instagram a lot with people where they like, you can generate a public link and then post that on Instagram. And it's actually a great way to sort of like, if you're working a recipe, you can post it, and it has like, you can make videos, and it can be sort of its own little, story of the prep steps and the ingredients, and people can now scale that recipe and convert it, or you can put it on your website. And so those are the 3 ways. So sharing a copy, granting access to the recipes, or publishing them to the web.
What do you wish you knew before you started Meez? Is there any skills that maybe you could have been better at, or just anything you were really surprised by?
Oh my God, there's like a billion things. I wouldn't even, wouldn't even know where to start. There's so many mistakes that we made. I think the most important one is, well, like with anything, just assume you don't know anything. I had a lot of cognitive bias around what I think a recipe app should be. So I did spend a lot of time talking to other chefs about what they do, what they don't do, what they like, what they don't like, where they're storing their recipes, all those kinds of things. But I think if I could have gone back, we probably would have just released sooner and then just gotten that feedback as we built, because it just took longer, cost more money for us to do what the chefs wanted. So I think there's never like an early enough time to just kind of like get it into everybody's hands. And also just some assumptions around the understanding of like mechanics of food costing and things like that I've done for the last 20 years. I wish when I started that I had realized that it's not as intuitive as I thought, because it took us a long time to build that intuitiveness into the app. We now have it, but I wish I would done it in the beginning.
So kind of like, what was the time frame with your launch? Was it minimum viable product, get it out there, get people using it? Or was it more like, let's get this right, we really need to work some kinks out?
We did sort of take a while before we launched because, my hypothesis was that the incumbent at the moment is Word docs and spreadsheets, right? So whether that's, the static files of those or like Google Sheets, Google Docs. And so we had to be at least 10x better than them in most things, and at least comparable in the things that where we needed to be. And that took a while. That wasn't something we could just do day one. And so we had to build a fair amount through that. And it took a lot of, a lot of money and time to do that. But it was the right thing to do. If I launched with like this very basic thing, it would have I already knew the answer that like, this isn't not going to be enough for you to switch. Apart from that, we launched like right during, like it was right when COVID hit was when we were planning to launch. Like May of 2020 was our like launch date. So I actually paused on the launch and instead had my developers stop what they were doing and build this sort of like consumer version of the app and launched this thing called Recipes for Relief. And I allowed chefs to create recipes in Meez and sell them to their customers, and 100% of the proceeds went to the chefs and their business. And so we helped chefs raise tens of thousands of dollars for themselves and for their business through this Recipes for Relief initiative. I ended that, at the end of 2020, and we launched at the end of 2020 with the B2B product. But we'll be bringing that back in another version in the future to really help sort of like chefs connect with consumers and generate more revenue and things like that. But I didn't feel it was right to launch when everybody was, shutting down. And so instead I was like, what can I, my mission is always just like, how can I have the biggest impact on the industry? Because this is the industry that gave me everything that I have. And, Meez is that now for me. I do believe that like this is going to have an everlasting sort of like paradigm shift type impact on the industry. But at the time, I had to ask myself, will this have that impact right now? And the answer was no. Like let's help my friends and other colleagues in the industry. Let's help these chefs like earn cash right now because they're all out of work, or their business is not generating revenue. And so that's what we did.
That was the first time I heard of you and saw this. I thought it was such a cool thing, like long before I even knew what Meez really was.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
What are some of your favorite resources? These can be culinary, business, personal, like websites, books, tools. What are some things that you really love that maybe have helped you grow either personally or professionally?
Well, I'm an avid reader, so I read a lot of books. And so there's so many books that have had an impact on me from a business standpoint and from a cooking standpoint. There's tons of cooks that I love. But in terms of like books as it relates to business, there's a bunch. I think Crossing the Chasm is a great one. Play Bigger, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, High Output Management by Andy Grove. I can go on. There's so many incredible books. I also I read Siddhartha once a year. It's incredible, sort of like gut check of like, where are you at in life? What are you thinking about? Like, what's important to you? What did you think was important that isn't? So I tend to sort of go towards books for that kind of thing.
Me too. As I didn't go to school for business. I went to Johnson & Wales for culinary. I had no business experience. So when I wanted to start my own business, I spent a ton of time reading books, listening to audiobooks, all kind of within that same realm. 0 to 1's a really interesting one. I don't know how, it's tough for me now to separate the man from the book.
Yeah.
It's like, can you still read? I read it long before I knew much about, his beliefs, politics, policies. It's like, could you go back today and reread that book and not look at it through like tinted glasses? I don't know.
It's funny you say that because I think, this is going to get a little bit, this could be like political, but there's really there's no one that's achieved something great that also hasn't, done something that probably annoys people. I don't believe in his political views, but I also can't sort of deny like the impact that he's had on the industry and the impact that book has had on me, because it's all about like just adding exponential value to the world. And that's how you create a great business. And I think that gets lost so often that people think, you just need to figure out how you become profitable or how you make a few dollars as passively as possible, whatever that thing is. And I think his sort of take is similar to Elon Musk now. Like, how much value can you bring? And Elon Musk, I know, is also very controversial, but like, it's hard to deny that he's literally changing our world. And his, like beliefs on creating value means sort of like, making sure that there's a big enough delta between the current utility incumbent and what you're, the state of the art, and like how big of an impact can you have and how many people can that impact? And it's a very similar sort of context of what Peter Thiel was saying. And I have to separate like the views from the person. I also think, at the end of the day, like, it's America. And as soon as we start like not reading things or not entertaining things or not listening or not like hearing both sides, it's the minute that we're like, we're just a part of that same problem, because there's people in my family who I don't believe with their political views, but I still love them and I still will listen to them. And I think we have to be careful about, how we actually like, how we go about that disagreement, because you need to be able to disagree and voice that, but you also need to, see that every human has flaws,
It's a slippery slope for sure. And, like every single person, show me an actor, a musician, and anyone who hasn't done something that didn't piss off someone. It's like there's musicians I love, and then people say like, but he was terrible as the front man. He was like the worst person and all his bandmates hate him. It's like, well, I still love the music. Like, I can't separate that out.
Yeah. Look at Kanye West, he's doing some really, really, really crazy things and he is a genius. And I get a lot of joy out of his music. I love his music, but like, and I see the things that he's doing and I'm like, oof, that's not, don't do that. And I don't agree with them and I wouldn't condone them, but he's brought so much joy to like me in terms of like his music. And there's lots of people like that I think, you just have to know that nothing is really binary, that humans are a real blend of lots of different things, and anything that you've done, there's probably somebody out there that doesn't agree with part of it. And it doesn't make you a bad person. There are some things that make you a bad person. So we can't separate that, but most of it is pretty blended.
Agreed. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Is there anything you want to leave our listeners with before we get out of here today?
No, I would say, it sounds like most of your listeners are chefs. So apart from obviously the shameful plug of Meez, I would say, just do what you love, continue to do what you love. Don't look at what other people are doing or, compare to other people. If you're cooking and you enjoy it and you're able to make a living at it, that's amazing. And it doesn't mean you need to be in a restaurant. It doesn't mean that you need to have started some sort of any type of business. If you found some sort of medium which you can cook and make a living from it, you're already successful.
Yes. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Go to chefswithoutrestaurants.org to find our Facebook group, mailing list, and chef database. The community's free to join. You'll get gig opportunities, advice on building and growing your business, and you'll never miss an episode of our podcast. Have a great week.